Okay, so you can
minimize.
Yep, you can leave it open and minimize it, or you can close this. It is
So if I close this, it won't take me out of everything.
It should not take you out of everything.
Okay. All right. Okay, we have a couple minutes before we're going to start. Going to give it a couple more minutes just so make sure that other people can log in. Hi, Barb. How are you doing? Hi, Jackie. Good you guys could join us. I miss you, Barb. I haven't seen you in a long time. I think I'll give it one more minute just in case there's a couple more people coming. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to be recording this on YouTube. So if you have to leave early or something, or you want one of your friends to see this, you can get at it at another time. Also down at the bottom, we'll get some of these things taken care of before we start. You'll see a Q&A feature. And if you have questions for our speaker or comments, that's where you would want to put that. And you can do that at any time throughout the presentation. And we will get to those at the end of it then. There's also a chat, and that is for if you are having some technical difficulties or anything like that, where you have a question for me as the moderator here. My name is Natalie Cruz, and I work here at the Marshfield Public Library, and I've been here in adult services and interlibrary loan for quite a while. I'm also here tonight with a coworker, Bethany Pearson. I'm gonna pop in here.
Hello.
So if you see me like kind of looking like I'm talking to myself, I'm really not. This is one of the first times that I've been on this side of a webinar, a Zoom webinar, so it looks a little different to me. So Bethany's here as my right-hand woman if I have any kind of technical difficulties or anything. So be patient with me with that. And I think we're going to get started. This is our family history talk, Shiver Me Timbers, Finding a Pirate in Your Family Tree, with our very own director, Jill Porter. And it sounds like you've uncovered some buried treasure in this pirate ancestor of yours. And personally, I hope he's kind of a nefarious rogue. So take it away, Jill. We've got a perfect night for this. A stormy, dark night.
Okay. Well, thanks, Natalie. I need to preface this with a little bit about me, just because I want to give people a good sense of where I am at. Can everyone? Okay. I am not a genealogy researcher. I have not done a lot of digging around in my own family history. There was a Porter family history that was compiled back in the 40s, and I've looked at it and enjoyed it, but I've really never poked around my own history. Being a librarian, I've certainly helped a lot of people get started with Ancestry and some of the print resources that are out there, but it just hasn't been my thing until recently. So this is the beginning of the perfect storm. Second, I grew up not knowing a whole lot about my ancestry. I mean, I knew I was English, Scottish, German, but I always figured that we pretty much turned up in the United States somewhere in the mid to late 1800s and didn't think anything more of it. Part of that may have been the demographics in my family. My mother was an only child. My father was the youngest of two, and everyone was quite a bit older than he was. So I just don't think a lot of that family history was passed down. Being a librarian, but not doing a lot of research anymore, I still try to keep my finger on some of the developments that are going on with the resources that we have. And one of the things that sparked this latest endeavor was Don Schnitzler's talk a few months ago, looking at the family tree aspect of ancestry. So despite not being a genealogy researcher, I have had a few questions about my past or my family history, and I wanted to take a look and see if I could answer one of those questions. And it all starts with maybe this woman, Elizabeth Electa Porter. This is my mother. And as you might see, she has a kind of unusual middle name. I know that, like a lot of my family members, minus me, she is named after her ancestors. I knew Elizabeth was her maternal grandmother. I did not know who Electa was. Fairly unusual name. I did look up at the derivation of it at some point. It routinely gets turned into Electra on all sorts of records. And I still remember my mother telling me about her middle name and going, no, it's not Morning Becomes Electra. So Electa always stood out in my mind. So one of the things I wanted to do is see if I could find out fairly quickly where the Electa in her name came from in our family. So one day I'm literally sitting in my office, finishing eating my sandwich, and I decide to check out the family tree thing. And so I go to Hugh Coulter, who was my mother's father, and look at the family tree results. And I look at this first one. I have no idea who these people are. They're probably very nice, but they have 11 attached records and 15 sources, which seem pretty good. Like they've probably done quite a bit of research, even though my great grandfather's name is incorrect. It's actually Fitz, not Fritz, but there's more R's that we keep adding to our names. But scrolling down, I see that he has the spouse listed as Electa Mabel Pendleton. So ding, 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 ding. We're already off to a good start. And this has taken me all of, a minute. So I pull up her record from his family tree or their family tree and see that I'm born and bred in Lapeer, just like my parents were. Lapeer is about 20 miles east of Flint and about 40 miles north of Detroit. It's a farming community. It's not too dissimilar to Marshfield, but this is where my family's from. And the thing that gets me really excited is I see her last name, which is Pendleton. And anyone who knows me knows that I am a rabid textile fan, especially of all things woolen. So I see Pendleton and I'm like, oh, I have to follow this and see where it leads. So obviously the next person I see in the family tree is Elisha Pendleton. And I click on his name and it's a dead end with this family tree. They've done no other research on it. And so I go back and I do another search for Elisha Pendleton, and I'm being really lazy and I'm only looking at family trees. I'm not actually looking at any documents yet, but I find Elisha in the Payne family tree with a reference to Munson Pendleton. Okay, so let's see if I can go backwards from there. And we're back to Hubbard. And what I have to say is right now, my mind is really beginning to get blown. First of all, we're looking at the East Coast now, and certainly at a time when I didn't think I had family in this country. Particularly when you look at Hubbard going back to 1759, Might have been a little young to fight in the revolution, but who knows? But certainly getting back there and a complete surprise to me. So I decide to go back from Hubbard and see that he is in Connecticut, and it takes me to Benijah, same family tree that I'm using for this. As you'll see here, there are no sources. If I hadn't been doing sort of what I consider a quick and dirty search, I may have gone back and tried to verify that this information is correct. Obviously, if you don't see any sources here, they haven't taken the time to link anything. But again, I'm eating my sandwich, I'm finishing my lunch. I just want to see what's going on. So I go with Benijah and in the same family tree, and it's a dead end. They haven't gone any farther. At this point, I look up here and I see Westerly, Rhode Island, and that intrigues me because I actually have a close friend who lives in Westerly. But I decide to see if I can figure out, as my lunch clock is ticking away, if I can figure out where Benijah came from. So back out another family tree, again, being incredibly lazy. And as I was just mentioning, you do have to be careful with family trees because the sources aren't always great. Benijah, his birth is 1729, death 1815, but there are references to the 1920 census. And, oh, geez. Maybe to the person putting together this family tree, the 1920 census had some relevance. I actually did some digging around afterwards, and there is another Benijah Pendleton who was alive during this time period, and I think that's who they may have been linking to. But again, I don't care. I'm after the Pendletons, and right here we're going back to 1697. So let's go back another one. And all of a sudden, some of the resources, and this is a different family tree that I found this under, the resources are beginning maybe to look a little bit better. You got the Connecticut Church Record Abstracts, which are usually pretty reliable. I have found that the dates in them can be a little off, but you know, when you're going back to the 1600s, this isn't terribly surprising. But Captain James Pendleton, who the heck's he? I have no idea. And I'm an American history major, so I have to go back even further. So I go back, and there he is, Captain James Pendleton. And he was actually a fairly prominent military leader. Obviously, he died before the revolution, but I forgot what it was. He did lead a couple of interesting campaigns. But the thing that really caught me about all of this was, and this is still in that same Morrison family tree, were all of the sources that started showing up. And this is just one page of the sources that they were citing. And so what I did was this is the gallery of some of the sources that they used. And this includes the New England History Genealogical Register, obviously a very valid source, the Rhode Island Vital Extracts, and not surprising after I got started doing this research, but certainly new to me were some of the American Revolution membership applications, either SAR or DAR. Also, North America Family Histories, and one source I was really familiar with is the Great Migration series that's out. And so I decided to get digging. Also, this one, Brian Pendleton and his descendants, I will talk about in a minute. But so Captain James Pendleton, and here's my next crisis. All right, obviously I want to know who Major Brian Pendleton is, but I also, my closest friend in high school growing up was a Mayflower descendant, and her last name was Price. So I'm kind of torn. Who am I going to look at first? Brian or Eleanor? Clock's ticking. I need to finish my lunch. I need to get back to work, but I just got to follow these two. It's real serendipity at this point, but I need to follow them. So I decide to go with Brian. And within ancestry.com, there are some references to a number of sources, and I find out a little bit about Brian Pendleton. And obviously, from this, he's a pretty big deal. No attempt is made here to record in detail. Oops, excuse me. All of the lands, transactions, or all of the offices held by Brian Pendleton. Such details of his life will be found in the various books on the Pendleton family written by Everett Hall Pendleton. And I did a little bit more digging. Brian Pendleton was actually one of the individuals responsible for establishing what was to become the state of Rhode Island. He was a major landholder there, also in New Hampshire, but really a big leader in the area that was Rhode Island. And the great thing was I found this reference, and it's also made reference to up here. These two books by Everett Hall Pendleton, two genealogies that he wrote, Brian Pendleton and his descendants, and also early New England Pendletons, which actually goes back into the English ancestry, which was really helpful to me. These books are available through a couple of sources. Obviously, you can still purchase copies of them. But if you Google these books online, quite often you can find quite a bit of content on Google Books. There are also sources that we have that include information to them, including the database we currently have on trial from the New England History and Genealogical Society, American Ancestors. It has the text in there. And I found it a couple of different places, but this was really helpful to me in my research. So there's Brian Pendleton, and he's a big deal. What about his wife, Eleanor Price? Because obviously I'm trying to figure out if she's somehow connected to my friend from high school. So I'm really struggling trying to find information on Eleanor, and lunch hour's over. I'm digging into my work time to do this, but it's good, valid research. So I started really poking around different places, and umgats of family trees. And some of them you'll see that, not so much in these are mostly Brian Pendleton, where his father and mother are not known, but a lot of them also with his wife, Eleanor, you don't see that her parentage is listed. And in several places I looked, it said it was, not known. But in going through this, I stumbled across Mayflower tree, Alice case, somebody's family tree. Obviously, they've got a fair number of resources and attached records, and they do have a father and mother listed. At this point, I see Cromwell, and the Hilary Mantel lover in me, the ears are pricking up. I'm getting really excited, and obviously this is worth pursuing as well. So I decide to do a little more digging and doing what all good librarians do when they're completely stuck. I Google Eleanor Price Pendleton and take a look at what pops up. And one of the things that popped up was this from Genie, which a lot of you researchers probably know about. I am less familiar with, but it was pretty interesting. but they do discuss how her parentage is the subject of quite a bit of discussion. There's no consensus, but there's some theories on it. I'm still going with the prior family history. My hunch is that that's probably correct. And I go with it. And lo and behold, I stumble across this. And again, this is one of these happenstance or really kind of freakish things that happens to me. Okay, so I used to live in the town of Beekman in Dutchess County, New York. The town of Beekman, I believe, has 700 residents. However, I lived on a very old estate that was, I literally lived in the chicken coop at this place, but the estate had been in my landlord's family for a couple of 100 years. There's actually a family cemetery on the property. You can't read any of the tombstones anymore, but I see the town of Beekman, and the fact the Pendleton families are there, and I'm a little freaked out, as you might guess. But here, it actually gets into the point where Brian Pendleton was married to Eleanor, born 22nd of April, 1599, and she is the daughter of Richard and Elizabeth Cromwell Price. Okay, so I am feeling really good about this now. But what's the deal with the Cromwells? So, find Elizabeth, see where she's born, Warwickshire in England, and she did die in the Plymouth colony. So score, we got some pilgrims in the family, and there's, or what I assume are pilgrims in the family, and there are the references to Thomas Cromwell and Anne Hoofdman, who I'm guessing was probably Dutch. And so, okay, Thomas Cromwell, the dates aren't quite right, but what's the deal with this guy? Is he related to the Cromwells in any way, shape, or form? So I do some digging on my 10th great grandfather, trying to figure out who he is and find some references to him eventually. But one of the things I landed on, the first thing said was Thomas Cromwell, a wealthy privateersman. Okay, so I know enough about, the Navy and sailing that a privateersman is actually a pirate. It's a well-heeled pirate, but they're still pirates. And so I really needed to find out more about him because, heck, how many people have a pirate in their family? So I Googled the guy, and here he is. This is quite a bit that I learned on genealogy. All in all, he probably wasn't a great guy. In fact, he pretty much sounds like a jerk. I think the one thing that made me giggle was that he was in service to, let me find out who it was. It's one of the earls, and yes, the Earl of Warwick, and he was under commission to them, working in the West Indies, and his job as part of this larger group of privateers was to commandeer Spanish ships and take all the loot on board of those Spanish ships. So somewhere in the West Indies, my ancestor captured 3 ships. And rather than turning everything over to the Earl of Warwick, he actually kept one of the ships for himself and sold everything and kept the money. So I thought that was kind of funny. Stealing the sort of the poor stealing from the rich, but not necessarily, because it ends up that he had quite a bit of money, but he did choose to live with I think they describe it some here with the lowly types when he was in Plymouth Colony. He didn't want to mix with the highfalutin types. However, he did know well enough to actually give Governor Winthrop a very, very expensive sedan for traveling in. I believe they said it cost 50,000 pounds at the time, which is just an insane amount of money. But so this is the guy, and a couple of the stories I found out about him, besides the fact that he stole one of the ships, was that he also accidentally killed one of the men who reported to him. Apparently, they had come ashore in Plymouth and for a number of weeks kind of terrorized the town with their drinking and carousing. And finally, Captain Cromwell was telling them to quiet down and behave. And one of his sailors was not behaving, so Captain Cromwell hit him with the hilt of his sword, so the handle part of it, and it accidentally pierced the sailor's skull and he died. And so there was a trial, he was acquitted, and interestingly, he lived a long life, but how he died in the end is he actually fell off his horse onto the hilt of his own sword and died that way. So a lot of the pilgrims thought that was rather a fitting way for him to die. But there he is, probably not the greatest guy, but he is my privateer relative, my 10th great grandfather. There has been some discussion whether or not he is actually related to the more famous Cromwells, and in all likelihood, he is not, though there are lots of people who would like to believe that he is. This is a story that I ran into. This was from Bradford's account of one of their, from the history of Plymouth, about them coming ashore and this guy accidentally, killing his own sailor. But so there's quite a bit out there. I have been to Plymouth Plantation, actually with the friend who was the pilgrim descendant, and thought it was kind of interesting. So, but I don't remember anything about any sailors. It was mostly about the people who actually founded Plymouth and were the good pilgrims. And lo and behold, I stumble across this from the Mayflower Society, and they have something called Pirates Ashore. And it was canceled last year because of COVID, but apparently my relative and his compatriots have been turned into sort of this cartoonish event that the Mayflower Society puts on every year in the fall. It's primarily a kids event, though it does look like they have a fair amount of carousing in the town of Plymouth. And I believe this is supposed to be Captain Thomas Cromwell, and this is the poor sailor who dies. So this is where I'm at. Not only do I find out that one of my relatives was a pirate, but he's now somewhat of a cartoon character. So there we're at. And like I said, all of this was done in, I think initially I did all of this research in about 20 minutes, just using, the back key basically on the family tree aspect of ancestry. And then afterwards going back and doing some real research. So some of the things I learned, first of all, and I've certainly heard this from Don many times, it's easier if you actually track your research, but I was doing this on a lark, so I didn't track it. So when I did have to go back and reconstruct it, I did take the time to verify that we had some birth and death records and marriage records and baptisms, so that this actually did fall into place. And I was fairly certain that this was the story. There's a lot that's wrong with a lot of family trees out there. Not only, I showed you the instance where the person cited the 1920 census for someone who lived in the 17th century. but they are a really good resource. I think if you're really getting started, or maybe you're stuck somewhere, take a look and see what someone else has done. I found those quite useful, but again, take them with a grain of salt and try to verify what you see in those family trees afterwards. Another thing is, don't use just one database. Like in my case, obviously I started with Ancestry, but even going out there and Googling things, I could see things from Genie, I could see things from MyHeritage that I didn't even have to register or pay for, but I could see enough to verify some of the information that I wanted. And so that was a good way for me to get started. Another thing is, I did sign up for my own Ancestry account once I got started with this. If you're trying to go between the regular desktop version of Ancestry, maybe the library's version of Ancestry, and a mobile version of Ancestry, it can be really, really confusing. They don't always display information the same way or necessarily in the same format. Eventually it does sync up with each other, but I did run into a couple of instances where I thought, oh my gosh, I knew exactly where that bit of information was, and now I can't find it now that I've changed to another resource. But eventually I did find it. And the last thing, and maybe this is well known to you, research is way, way easier if you can actually go back to the American Revolution or the Mayflower, because so much research has been done for people trying to get their membership into, either the Mayflower Society or the Sons or Daughters of the American Revolution. And there are tons of published genealogies out there. So really, once you get to that point, it's pretty easy. So I've followed different lines of my family since I originally did this research. Found that time and time again. I am curious. I think the next thing I will tackle is trying to figure out, for almost all of my family members, there's like a 10 to 12 year gap when they left the East Coast and showed up in Michigan. I'd like to kind of find out where I can, what happened during those years, because the history major in me is really interested in that. So were there any questions that anybody had about all of this?
Turn your camera on.
Comments, clues?
They might be typing, so you can go ahead and just start with what you have to say.
Thank you, Jill. That was excellent. Your story did not disappoint. I'm going to give people some time to come up with some comments or some questions for you, and we'll read them off to you when that happens. I was particularly intrigued about the town of, is it Beekman?
Yes.
Yeah, that's quite ironic. And I've also found things like that in my family history when I've done things, and I've learned to become a true believer that there really are no coincidences in life, that things happen for reasons. And when they come at you sideways like that, it's shocking, isn't it?
It really is. I actually had to go back and look at Find a Grave to see if the cemetery that was, on that property was somehow, connected in any way. It wasn't, but still, yeah, it was very interesting.
We do have a question from Jackie Zollner. Do we have access to Ancestry at the library? Is there someone to help in the process? I can answer that if you want. We do have people to help with that. We also have, if you're in town here, we have a wonderful room filled with all sorts of genealogy books and databases, things like that. And Ancestry, the library version, is free right now until the end of the year. So you can use that from home as well. But we have wonderful people at the adult services desk here at the library who will be willing to help you locate information and kind of get you started. Barb also has a question. Well, kind of a comment. Boy, it was so much more than just birth and death information. How interesting to get some real human details. I agree. Any other questions from anyone? I loved that you had photos of like Captain James Pendleton. My goodness, he looks so regal, and that's kind of a neat thing to find actual photos.
I have to confess, I haven't, that was taken from somebody's family tree. I did not verify whether or not that was actually him, because I did notice, especially with Captain Cromwell, there were a number of images up for him, particularly on ancestry family trees, that actually ended up being Blackbeard.
Okay.
So people have put up some fairly interesting things, but
Well, that's the librarian in you, I think.
I
that
know,
we
I
always
know.
have to have at least a couple different sources to confirm it.
exactly. But I will dig into that at some point.
Anybody else have any comments or questions for Jill? Don says, good job from downstairs to all of us here. So thank you, Don.
Yeah, certainly the person who encouraged me to get started on this. So
Yeah,
who
I
knew
do
what
think
would
that,
find?
I think that everybody at some point in their research will be surprised by something. That's kind of how I have come to see it. And I think everyone might have a character that's kind of a character, so to speak. Like I ran across a quote the other day, and I thought this might be perfect for this presentation tonight, from George Bernard Shaw. It says, if you can't get rid of the family skeleton, you may as well make it dance.
That's great.
Barb says it was a fun discovery. Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, if there's no more questions, we can wrap it up here. It was an excellent presentation, Jill. Thank you for doing that and for sharing all your family history there.
Thanks for having me, Natalie.
Yeah,
this is the first.
All right, well, we'll be ending this, and hopefully we'll have some more of these, maybe even in person. So take care, everyone.